Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Sean Talks Star Wars, the semi weekly podcast here on YouTube, hosted by me, Sean Hussey. And this week, I'm very glad to have my guest on. This is somebody that I've talked a lot of Star Wars with, somebody I really like talking Star Wars with. And I'm glad that you could join me for my third episode, my good friend Nathan Hicks. What's up, Nate? How you doing?
I'm doing well, as good as can be expected.
That's good, man. I'm glad to hear it.
Yep.
So, per usual, we like to run down the week news or whatever came out between the last episode and this episode in terms of news. And we actually had a couple things come out. I'm not going to be covering every time a new comic releases because obviously we get new comics every week. But I will try to cover some of the book releases that we get. And two of them popped up on my radar this week that released on Wednesday. So I figured that I'd talk a little bit about them in the news rundown. The first of which we're going to switch over is A Crash of Fate by Zoridai. I don't know. Sorry. I don't know her name. Cordova. And this is one of the Galaxy's Edge tie in books. A bunch of these books are actually Galaxy's Edge tie ins. And this is a young adult novel. Takes place after The Last Jedi, actually, so in between episodes 8 and 9. But it's super isolated. It takes place on Batu, which is, of course, the location of Galaxy's Edge. And the synopsis reads that Izzy and Jules were best friends until Izzy's family abruptly left Batu when she was 6. Now she's back, and Jules, the boy who's never left, is unsure what to make of her. And of course, this revolves a lot around the First Order taking over Batu under Supreme Leader Snoke. And from what I've heard, there's not a ton of canonical connections here, anything that really leads you into Episode 9. But there is definitely some stuff there for young adult readers. I always tell people not to, skip out on the young adult novels. Lost Stars by Claudia Gray is one that I really like. It's probably my favorite Star Wars novel. And it's just something that I tell people to check out and read because you never know what you're going to get with them. They're usually pretty good, and I know people typically think that YA is associated with things like Twilight, and honestly, they're better than that. The next one is Star Wars Myths and Fables. And this one is really cool. I talked about this one a little while ago. They're actually my desktop wallpapers right now. Um, and this one's written by George Mann and travel to the far reaches of the Star Wars universe, including the remote outer rim world of Batu from Galaxy's Edge, with this unique treasury of in world space tales. And they have some really cool illustrations, which are on the screen right now. And there's 9 tales here, kind of told from a fairy tale perspective about Star Wars. I've heard this one's really good too. This one is one that I might actually pick up later this week. Apparently, it's really cheap and really short. I'm a big sucker for fantasy. I'm a big arguer that Star Wars is mostly fantasy and not sci-fi. So I'm kind of glad to see that this book is out and about for people to check out. And because the next one ties into sort of our topic this week, Nate, do you have any thoughts on either A Crash of Fate or the Myths and Fables?
The Myths and Fables is one that I want to get. I'm looking at it on StarWars.com. Like the artwork they show is just incredible.
Yeah, that's really
Um,
cool.
and a lot of really interesting stuff in that one. Um, I haven't read into it too much. I just mainly looked at the artwork. Um, but still, I mean, it's really short. It seems like so. It'll be one that's on my radar to pick up for sure.
Yeah, and apparently, like, some of the tales are about characters we know. Like, I heard there's one about Obi-Wan, one about General Grievous. Obviously, in the artwork, we see Darth Vader, so there's definitely one about him. And then there's some original tales as well. Um, I think this one's really cool. And then last, this is a book that has not come out yet that was revealed earlier this week on Wednesday on the Star Wars show, The Secrets of the Jedi, which I'm super excited about. We've got those pages on the screen for you right now. Um, this looks really cool. This is a new book from author Mark Sumerak, chronicling the history of the Jedi Order with Luke Skywalker as your guide. It comes out November 15th, and the tome is filled with lush paintings, special interactive features, including a pop up holocron, a translator card, a Jedi equipment booklet, and more. This is really cool. You can see on the preview pages there's things, going back to the Old Republic, talking about abilities, talking about certain Jedi masters and knights, and even stuff about like the Last Jedi and the fall of of Luke's new Jedi Order. Some people are wondering how he's writing this after he died. Maybe that tells us some things about Episode 9 and Force Ghosts. That should be interesting as well. I don't know if we're going to get a ton of Episode 9 information in this one, but I definitely think the timing is important. There's been stuff like this in Legends where Luke Skywalker has like done books about Jedi Order. Most notably, there's the Book of Jedi and Book of Sith. I believe the Book of Bounty Hunters had this too, where like there was scribbles inside the pages of these books and stories, and you would find things from like Yoda, Mace Windu, Luke Skywalker, all these characters that we're very familiar with, and they were writing inside the pages of these books. But this one looks like it's told strictly from the perspective of Luke Skywalker. It's really interesting to see his perspective on a lot of these characters that we know, and then to now find out that canonically, yes, Luke Skywalker knew a lot about the Jedi Order and about these Jedi. I read the page about Ahsoka Tano. That one piqued my interest because those are two characters that have been around at the same time now, and I really want them to interact in some way canonically. Clearly, Luke is now aware of Ahsoka, but there's not a ton of detail there as to whether or not they ever met or anything like that. So that's still kind of up in the air. But since this whole episode is about Luke Skywalker, and that's something that Nate is super passionate about, Nate, what do you like about this book? What this looks really cool, honestly. So
Yeah, I definitely want this. It looks like it's kind of a cool take on almost a better way of doing like the old visual dictionaries.
mhm.
I would much rather have this than a visual dictionary because this looks awesome. The artwork in it's great. Um, I'm super stoked for this book, and we get at least so far one new image of Yaddle.
Yeah.
Um, that's pretty neat. Even more mysterious than Yoda, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm super stoked on this, and there's some good tidbits in here that we'll touch on, I think, in a little bit with our talk.
Yeah, I've definitely picked up on some things already. Just like I reviewed and read up on these pages that we got for previews. Um, One, it's on the screen now. The Old Republic Jedi seem to be wielding dual-bladed lightsabers, or at least some of them are. That's just a little bit more information. We've seen both in Star Wars Rebels and in some comics that Jedi of the Old Republic also wielded crossguard sabers, very similar to Kylo Ren's. So we're seeing more variations of the lightsaber used by Jedi, it seems, by the time of the prequel trilogy, and even hundreds of years before the prequel trilogy. Like they were using just the standard single blades. But it seems like the Jedi of old were more capable in using different types of lightsaber blades. For whatever reason, those were discontinued or whatnot. There's some really cool stuff about the Force Ghosts here and the Force Priestesses. That ties back into Clone Wars Season 6 and the journey that Yoda goes on. Luke Skywalker, for me, like we're going to get into this, but like Luke Skywalker for me has never been a character that I'm like super attached to. But I really like his perspective on things because he's sort of this like man out of time when it comes to the Jedi. So for him to be exploring all of these old themes that we're very familiar with from the prequel trilogy and for Clone Wars, for him to be kind of writing about this from his perspective is really cool, especially since we know that by The Last Jedi, he really thought that the Jedi Order like should be, disbanded and like should not be revived at all. He's definitely someone who was ashamed and upset with the old Jedi ways, at least of the prequel era and how the Jedi fell. So to see his perspective on all of this is great. And in the 4 pages, or I guess 8 pages, because they're 4-page spreads that we've gotten, there's a lot of valuable information. So I can only imagine what else is hiding within these pages, and something I'm probably going to pick up right in November. Hopefully, it's available at Galaxy's Edge because that's actually when I'm going to be there. So maybe I could pick it up on the shelves there. Um, Other than that, did you see anything in these pages, Nate, that looked interesting to you? Anything that you picked up on? Um, there's some cool stuff about the Last
Uh,
Jedi.
yeah, I'm more interested in his take. Like, I mean, we get the page of the Jedi Masters and Knights. I'm interested to see, his knowledge and what he thinks about some of them. Um, I'm interested in any knowledge he has on like the old Republic and stuff like that. So I think we're gonna get a really good lore dump out of this book, and that's what I'm interested in, more so than like his takes on the Last Jedi stuff.
Yeah, I hope that like they don't dumb it down. It feels like they might. Um, something that I'm a little worried about just with the age range that I think they're shooting for with this book is like they're going for more generic information that's already pretty well known. I'm sure we'll get some really cool little tidbits here and there, but I'm hoping we'll get some more in-depth stuff in the actual pages of the book. Um, Something I noticed real quick, something I figured I'd mention to you, is like they talk about some of the force abilities on one of the pages. And one of the abilities that they've kind of shoved under the rug for a really long time now is like the force run. Like the one that Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon do in The Phantom Menace.
Yeah,
It's like the one time we've seen it, and I don't think we've ever seen it again. Because I feel like it's
yeah,
one of those abilities where, like, if every Jedi knew how to do it, which supposedly they do, but like if Jedi could always use that ability, they'd get out of a lot of scenes that we or tense scenes that we see in the movies or in the series. Um, I'm glad they mentioned the Force jump. Honestly, the thing that's most prevalent in is actually like the Lego Star Wars games, because that's
hmm
really the only place where it's like super used and useful. Um, the other stuff is pretty straightforward stuff we see often in the movies. But I thought that the Force jump and the Force run were two things that like we don't get a ton of canonically. So I'm glad that those are kind of coming back, and I hope that on one of those other pages we do see something about the Force run because it's definitely something that should still exist and should be mentioned, even if they're trying to kind of throw it under the rug.
yeah.
So going into kind of our overall episode theme, we're doing something a little different. So on the first episode, Alex and I talked about Kylo Ren, just everything about his character. In the second episode, Josh and I kind of went through Revenge of the Sith, like beat by beat, and talked about what we love, what we don't like, things like that. Kind of really broke down that movie for 2.5 hours. Nate and I gonna do something a little different, kind of combine the two. We're gonna be talking about Luke Skywalker, but we're not gonna be talking all things Luke Skywalker. We're just gonna be talking about the journey of Luke Skywalker and sort of what he goes through from a more, I don't know, Force character perspective, as opposed to like film and story structure perspective. So there's obviously a lot of heart there, a lot that goes on behind the scenes with that character, a lot of things thematically that go on with him. Um, so I figured since we have, a good amount of time to kill, Nate, I know you have
hmm
a lot of stuff about Luke's trials and what he goes through, mostly with Empire Strikes Back and then Return of the Jedi. But I figured we could start again. We've had this conversation before, but I figured why don't we talk a little bit about where Luke starts with the hero's journey in A New Hope, because that's kind of his first step of the journey, but also an entire journey in of itself, um, and something
Yep.
I like talking about. Um, so basically, the hero's journey is a huge sort of template for how characters in film and books and television can like go through this really interesting journey. It was developed by Joseph Campbell after, I don't know, like the early 1900s. Um, and it sort of like revolutionized the way that we tell stories about our heroes. Um, we know that, George Lucas kind of grew upon that, and he, really set the bar for how it should be used, which was great. I just love that. And then they've since been using it for a ton of things all over the place. Lord of the Rings, most notably. He uses it a ton. Harry Potter in some ways. Like a lot of fantasy books use it. It's a really easy tool to kind of bring your characters full circle. Um, you know, we could talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to go through it as in depth as I did before. There's a lot of steps to it. Um, but, we could kind of start and talk about that.
I mean, my first kind of takeaway is, if you're into fantasy, and this leads into your belief that it's more fantasy than sci-fi. The old fantasy cliche, just a simple farm boy that becomes a hero, and I mean, we get that. At least at first, especially not knowing, if you just look at the the original trilogy without taking into account the others, you know, he's just a simple farm boy, a nobody who becomes a hero, and it's not until later that you find out that he's actually not. But yeah, I mean, simple farm boy cliche. I think they did it the best too, honestly.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it kind of starts with like this departure, and how Luke is, called to adventure, kind of refuses that call, like doesn't really want to, go on this adventure, thinks that he has to stay with his uncle and help. And then he ends up going, he meets the mentor. That's a step of the journey, which of course is Obi-Wan Kenobi. He crosses the first threshold, which is kind of his first challenge, and we relate that often to the cantina scene, and just the encounters that he has there. Um, and, kind of entering the belly of the whale. That's sort of the separation between what he knows and what he's going into. Um, and that's kind of like the first overall departure part of that. And that takes you up kind of to when he departs Tatooine, which is very fitting. Obviously, Lucas really followed this to a T when he was designing the script for Star Wars. I love that first arc because it feels so grounded, not only because it's Star Wars, but also just like it relates very well to people and how they want to get out of maybe where they came from, and sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, and like the struggles that come with that and the opportunities that you might have to jump on. Luke Skywalker to me has always been a very different character in A New Hope than he has in anywhere else in the saga. He feels very different after the events of A New Hope, and I think part of that is due to the fact that like his journey had been completed in a way at the end of A New Hope, and then to carry that character forward, you're kind of changing that journey and creating a new one. But I love all that Tatooine stuff, especially when you account for like deleted scenes of stuff and hit with him and Biggs and all that. You really get a lot of context into who this guy is, and what kind of hero he is and where he comes from.
Yeah, definitely, definitely, and like, you know, a lot of what I want to focus on comes right after this, but this is such a big setup for his character. I mean, the kid was gonna join the Imperial Academy up until Biggs told him like, "Nah, I'm peacing out. I'm bailing on these fools."
Yeah.
So, and then it just gets even more interesting from there. I mean, you know, he doesn't. It's not that he doesn't want to go. He wants to go, but like, he's got his responsibilities at home that he's got to think of first. And then, the Empire chooses for him. Essentially, the Empire created that monster that took them down. So,
No, yeah. I mean, his relationship with his aunt and uncle are super important to the story. Um, and sort of without their deaths, like he probably never would have gone on the adventure. So like that's a very crucial part of who his character is and how that character is developed um, throughout the first act of this movie in a way. And then it kind of goes into like what they call the initiation. So he's got things like trials, which are things like when he fights the little blaster droid on the Millennium Falcon. Um, there's a section called Meeting with the Goddess is the official term. That's sort of his encounter with Princess Leia. Um, there's some really great development there of just like, in the literal sense, meeting with the goddess is like he's meeting the character would be meeting with like this deity, and the deity gives him something that would like help him further on his quest. Um, However, Lucas has always been someone who's been a fan of female empowerment and just making sure that there's good representation of action females and badasses and stuff like that. And through Leia, yes, that's the meeting with the goddess, but Leia is also the asset that Luke gains that like will help him throughout the rest of his journey. And on her own, she's great, but she's also a really helpful friend and ally. And we later learn sister to Luke Skywalker. Um, and just that, she's the one, she can handle herself, obviously, but she also becomes very helpful to Luke down the line. Um, and there's a temptation period. This connects more so to Return of the Jedi, and the temptation of the dark side. We're obviously going to get more into that as we move along, but that's just one step there. And as it says, it kind of deviates from the film here and there. Lucas does save some aspects of the journey for later parts because there's definitely a section here called the Atonement with the Father. He must confront whatever holds the ultimate power in his life. Often that's the father figure, and of course that happens at the end of The Empire Strikes Back. And then there's a step where the hero, armed with new knowledge, is ready to take on the next part of the adventure. Sort of this moment of realization of I can do this. And at that point, technically, you are supposed to have achieved whatever the goal of the quest was. In some ways, you can look at the quest as destroying the Death Star. I personally look at it as receiving the Death Star plans and returning those to Yavin 4. So that ends that step there. And that would move into the return section, which we'll get into, of them destroying the Death Star. But like, obviously, there's a lot that goes on in the Death Star sequence of A New Hope. It's sort of your second act. It's a really great act. I argue all the time in my head of whether A New Hope or Rogue One is my favorite Star Wars movie. Rogue One definitely sets the precedent, or A New Hope sets the precedent for a lot of these other Star Wars films, and I really love the hero's journey stuff within them. And of course, all of that relates back to Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So one thing, I mean, I don't know how soon you want to start diving into this, but one thing I wanted to really focus in on early was Luke's kind of, I guess, his like first lesson, which is what's that in Hero's Journey, where he's on the Millennium Falcon and going against the probe.
Right.
So I really wanted to focus in on that because it's his first, it's like Obi-Wan says, first step into a larger world. And he's got his father's lightsaber, and Obi-Wan's give him that first lesson. And I mean, really, in a way, he's skipping, years of training, at this point, like he had in the Republic in the prequel trilogy. You know, he's already almost basically an adult at that point. He's like in his late teens.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's like at least 15 years of training that he's not getting, but he's still starting small, the little just deflecting, feeling the force and deflecting the little blaster bolt that comes from that little droid. And I think it's really important to note that, you know, Luke's journey with the force is to become a Jedi, but everything about how he goes from being a normal dude, I guess, to a full-fledged Jedi Knight is done completely different than anyone else that we know of or have seen in the movies. And so yeah, I mean, I find that, I mean, the more we learn about, the lore and whatnot, you get some outliers, but I mean, yeah, he's the only one really that that was trained the way he was. And And I think that shows throughout the movies too that he didn't have that formal background growing up in like a temple and being taught from the time he's a little child. So yeah,
No, yeah, I mean, his approach to training and how Obi-Wan trains him is very different from how other Jedi are typically trained. Even Anakin, who, was brought in late, was not brought in nearly as late as Luke was. Um, and the questions as to why Luke wasn't trained sooner, typically those answers lie within like Uncle Owen and just his refusal of Obi-Wan's help and like wanting to protect his nephew, which I think is super noble, but definitely like a factor in why Luke, you know, wasn't trained younger. I think it says a lot too because we could argue about this, but like debatably right now, it kind of seems like Luke was the most powerful Jedi anyway. He was able to do the Force projection, obviously, at the end of The Last Jedi, something that we had never seen before, something that was capable in Legends, and that's where Ryan Johnson got the idea from. But whether or not it had actually been done before, it seems like Luke was the first to do it. So obviously he has an immense amount of power, especially since he was just cut off for the Force for so long. And then to come back and achieve a feat like that, it makes you really consider the fact of he was perhaps the most powerful Jedi. And even with that late training, he was able to, do everything that he's done. And then, of course, die doing the performing the Force projection. So it really says a lot just about how powerful he is and what his character can do in the Force. And I'm looking forward to seeing where that ties into Episode 9. We're obviously going to talk a little bit about Luke in Episode 9 at the end. Yeah. To wrap up A New Hope and kind of get into, all of that, we have the return, which is kind of returning back to where he came from. There are moments where, again, like you refuse the call, you refuse the return. You don't want to go back. For Luke, this is when Ben dies, or Obi-Wan, and he doesn't want to return. He doesn't want to believe that Ben's really dead. He had finally found a mentor figure, a kind of a father figure, and to lose that so quickly. And then again, I like tying it all back together, and had it not been for Leia to kind of shake him out of it, kind of being that asset and friend and helpful part of the team, Luke probably would never have gotten over it and been able to help destroy the Death Star. There's something that's literally called the Magic Flight, which comes back during the return. That's literally the flight back in the Falcon, when they fight the TIE fighters and stuff. There's a rescue from without, a friend being Han Solo, helping him destroy the Death Star, getting Vader off of his tail so that Luke can blow the Death Star. The crossing of the return threshold is, returning to retain the wisdom gained. I relate that, of course, just to the destruction of the Death Star. But now it's kind of a really great parallel because his return world, like the world he's returning to, is not Tatooine. It's just a world without the Empire because there wasn't a big Imperial presence on Tatooine. So that was kind of the world that he started in, a world without the Empire, entered the world where the Empire is the biggest deal, and then is now going back in a way to a world where the Empire is a severely less threat without the Death Star. And then the last two are just kind of like the ability to master both worlds, both sort of the powerful one and understanding his dual responsibilities now, one as the last Jedi in a way, right? In the movies, he's the last Jedi. There are definitely other Jedi around though. And then kind of being able to accept the world that he's like a rebellion fighter now and has to kind of finish helping to defeat the Empire. And now where he goes from there kind of wraps up that journey. So yeah, Luke definitely has like this encompassing overall journey in A New Hope. And then we're going to get into now like the overarching journey that he goes through throughout all of his film appearances and who he is as a character. Um, I definitely want to let you tackle that one, Nate. Do you have any more thoughts just on the Last Jedi, or not the Last Jedi? Damn it, A New Hope.
New
I
Hope.
was thinking about him being the Last Jedi at that moment.
Um, for me, and kind of just my focus is on the Force side of it, his journey in the Force. But as far as the hero journey goes, uh, where his journey within the Force and like his growing up, I guess, in the Force, his road to becoming a knight. Um, the only real place that touches with the hero's journey is probably right there when he's training with Obi-Wan for the first time, and then again right at the end, right before they blow up the Death Star, where he turns off his computer, his targeting computer, and just trust the Force. It's that's kind of my big parallel there for, I guess, a new hope. But things really get interesting with Empire, with the hero's journey, and with his journey to becoming a Jedi Knight. So
No, yeah, definitely agree with all of everything you just said. Do you kind of feel free? Part of what I want to do, like the only reason that I covered the hero's journey so in depth is because we didn't discuss it previously. But like
yeah,
part of what I want to do with this one is just I want to let you guys, anybody who's on, like, go off, talk. You definitely have a
I got
better
you.
understanding of what you want to talk about in terms of Empire and Return of the Jedi and Luke's journey through that. So
Yeah,
I'm handing you the reins, and just tell me.
yeah.
Alex taught me a ton about Kylo Ren, and Josh taught me a ton about Revenge of the Sith. So, uh, teach me about the journey of Luke Skywalker, a character I don't really
Well,
like all that much. So maybe you can
right,
change my
yeah.
attitude.
So, my thing for Luke, and you just touched on this a few minutes ago. Like Luke isn't the balance in the Force. His father was. Vader is that balance, and you know, Vader instead, turns to the dark side, and the balance. For me, I see it as that's how balance was created. Now, granted, you know, there it was very out of balance in a way, but when you take a look in only movies and not, Clone Wars or Rebels or anything like that, only movies, you know, there's two Sith alive and there's two Jedi alive. And that to me was the point of the balance. It's just the balance of power was what was shifted. And so even though there wasn't necessarily balance in the Force, there kind of was in a way with just Force users. So it gets a little wonky in my head, I guess. But like in a way, there was balance. But I feel like that power shift really does balance back out. I mean, in a Return of the Jedi, but we'll get to that later. But my thing is like, even though Vader is that balance in the Force that he was prophesied to be, he becomes that. But in all honesty, Luke is, I think, the stronger Jedi. And for a while, I used to think Luke was pretty weak, but especially now, Luke, in my opinion, is definitely the most powerful Jedi. More so than Yoda and Mace Windu. I mean, maybe not early on, but definitely around the time that Return of the Jedi ends and he goes on. I definitely feel like just his raw potential and is huge, and he just lacks the finesse, the grace, I guess, and the long years of training. But he's definitely got that raw power, and I find that that's one thing that's interesting with his journey in the forces. I feel like that raw power is really what carries him through his training in a way. um I mean, in Empire, he I know because I've read one of the canon books, between A New Hope and Empire. He does train a little bit, mostly meditating, trying to do some lightsaber forms or whatever, but he doesn't really get too far in his training alone, which I think is part of the reason why Obi-Wan comes to him on Hoth. Is because, Luke can't do it by himself, and I think the time was right where, Luke had put a lot of time in with the rebellion. They'd won some battles. and he was getting frustrated with his lack of, I guess, power and use in the Force. And then Obi-Wan steps in. He's like, "All right, it's time for you to go see Yoda." And that's where you're really going to get the bulk of the training that you can get at this point, I guess you could say. And I feel like, especially when he, up until he meets up with Yoda, just his raw power with the Force and just that tenuous connection that I think he has with it, kind of tell. And on Hoth after he got attacked, and his connection to the Force, it can be a little tenuous, but that potential's there and it's huge. So I kind of forgot where I was going with that. I'm getting distracted by my own thoughts. I had a goal, and then I just kind of talking my way around it. But definitely just overall power is there. And despite not being formally trained for many years, he's still probably one of well, at that point he's one of the most powerful that ever existed, I think. But there's definitely a lot of what do you call it? Not really failure, but a lot of, not
Setback.
not accomplishing much, I guess
Okay,
you could
yeah,
say.
like a lack of
So,
accomplishment.
um, but uh, man, I feel like I can just keep going and going and going. But like that was basically my whole thing right now. I mean, and I'm kind of talking like in that period before he meets up with Yoda. It's just like I don't know if you have anything to add to it or any observations of like, just that time period between A New Hope and him getting to Yoda for the first time.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Like I didn't think about it. I think the gap here, and I think it's a 3 year gap
Yeah, it's like
canonically
2 or 3 years, something like
between
that.
A New Hope and Empire, and like it had never really occurred to me that like Luke didn't know how to train during that time. So like for him to just kind of I guess meditate and whatnot, maybe a little bit of lightsaber practice, but like
Yeah,
he really didn't know how to train, and there was nobody there to guide him because obviously the first time he sees Ben's ghost is in The Empire Strikes Back. Um, so it's an interesting dynamic, like that you mentioned that like I haven't really considered before. And now I'm like really intrigued because I'm trying to think like in my mind Luke Skywalker has never really I don't know. I guess he is the most powerful Jedi. I don't agree with your point that
right.
he's almost the most powerful at the end of Return of the Jedi or like is. Um I definitely think it takes him longer than that. By the end of The Last Jedi then probably. Yoda to me, I still think has a lot of untapped potential. I still think that Yoda might be more powerful, but I think we're led and are supposed to believe through the story of Star Wars that Luke is the most powerful Jedi,
Right.
which is fine because he's like the main character, and I totally get that. Um, I'm not gonna try to make any stupid arguments that like Anakin was powerful, but
Yeah.
like in his own right. And I'm not gonna make any arguments that like Mace Windu or Obi-Wan or anybody else were like the most powerful. Um, I do like the idea of like a all powerful like Jedi from the Old Republic. Maybe something that we'll explore like later in the future in stories. I'm not really here to like argue about whether or not Luke is the most powerful Jedi or not. Um, but I like the idea. It's something they've set up since the Disney era. Is like each Jedi that they introduce or like reintroduce kind of has their own thing. In terms of like force ability.
Yeah.
Like for Yoda, it feels kind of like his mastering of the Force Ghost in a way, or you could say that that's for Qui-Gon. Yoda does that
Right.
cool thing in Revenge of the Sith where he like absorbs the Force lightning.
Yeah.
He's the only person we've seen do that. Um, for Luke, it's like the Force projection, which I really like. Ezra Bridger in Star Wars Rebels, he has a Force connection with like animals and like creatures. So he's very close and can communicate well with those guys, which I really like. I think that's a really cool Force ability. Kanan Jarrus in that series, he's blind. So he kind of masters the Force in a new way after becoming blind. Um, just all these little connections here and there. And for Luke, like obviously the Force projection feels like the most powerful one of all of these characters. And like to see now and to realize, it didn't really ever occur to me that like one, he wasn't trained young. He got very minimal training, and then he got no real training for 3 years after that until he met up with Yoda. Um, I haven't read it. I believe it's Heir to the Jedi. It was the book you were talking about.
Yes, I had just pulled it up and I was gonna cut in when I had a moment. But yeah, Heir to the Jedi is the book. And in that he talks a lot about struggling with like, how am I supposed to be a Jedi? Like how do I do this? What do I do? And there's parts in that where he's hunting for any sort of clues to the old Jedi Order. So
No, yeah, I know that's something that's a thread that has been carried throughout the Disney era. Is like Luke is somebody who's been searching and searching and searching for like old Jedi texts, old Jedi relics. In a way, not to like deviate, it's very interesting because he's this great parallel for both Kylo and Palpatine. We know that Palpatine, during the 19-year stretch between Revenge of the Sith and New Hope, was always looking for new Sith relics, always looking for the next thing. We know that he was looking for just so many things, and most of them related to extending lifespan, which is a great tie to Episode 9, but we're going to get into all that later. Um, and for him to also for Kylo, Kylo is this character who we know now is like a Sith relic hunter, a Jedi hunter, somebody who like is looking for all these ancient artifacts and stuff. So I'm really looking forward to seeing just how that parallel continues to grow over the years. And is something that like I haven't read Heir to the Jedi, as they said, so like for that to be an aspect of his character that has existed since even the early Disney days is really cool.
yeah. And one other thing I want to mention, like it's worth noting too, that you brought up Yoda and how powerful. There's something, it's one thing to be omega powerful, and it's another thing to be less powerful and just have more like finesse and like training and skill. And I think that's a big part of like Obi-Wan and Anakin's duel on Mustafar is, skill and experience beat out just the raw power. So that's just kind of like I guess my little counterpoint to anyone who says Luke isn't the most powerful. Like, he's just not as good, skillful, I guess you could say.
No,
So
yeah, I got you. Um, yeah, so like going into now like Yoda and how that factors into things and like sort of the ending of Empire, we'll kind of cover that span. Um, I like that era or that time period, I guess. Um, I think that it's a great reality check for Luke. It's his first
hmm
experience with like the ways of the old. Um, Yoda kind of teaches him a lot of great lessons, and still his impatience like gets the better of him ultimately.
yeah,
Um, so like, what are you obviously want to talk a lot about that. We can get to the I'm your father stuff too. Um,
yeah.
but
We'll get to that after Yoda.
yeah, you like Yoda, so what do you got?
So what's really neat is like after that stretch of Luke not really having any training, and he gets handed this golden egg of like, here you go, here's how you can complete your training and become a Jedi. Luke shows up, and of course he's impatient. He's been waiting for years to get some sort of instruction or just to learn anything. And so I get the impatience, because I don't really, I kind of, I don't know, I see that as like his big character flaw. I mean, I kind of can see it as being his character flaw, but like you don't really see a whole lot of impatience in A New Hope. So I feel like a lot of they just tried to make that out to be his kind of character flaw, but I don't really buy it. I think it's more so just his lack of training, and he's like stepped into this whole world and he's done this great thing and destroyed the Death Star, but he hasn't gone anywhere since, and he's stagnating. He hates it. So I mean, I can of course see why he's so impatient to start training. He's finally getting what he wants out of it, and Yoda's just like, nah, chill, bro. Like, eat some mud soup first. And like, I mean, that kind of pissed me off too, I guess. You know, but but he does get really good training out of it once he gets over that. Once he realizes that he's in the presence of Yoda, that's when he really starts to kind of change, and then you see you see his training. And the thing is like it's his first taste of formal Jedi training, but the thing is like it's nothing like the training that Padawans got in the Republic. And he's older, and they're in a swamp, and it's one on one versus classroom, which we see some of in Attack of the Clones. um so he's really getting this kind of jump start, I guess, or kind of like a crash course through the basics. I mean, you see him working on cardio. Even he's running with Yoda on his back while getting lessons in you know, the mentality of being a Jedi. I mean, at this point, I mean, yeah, he's done this great thing, but he's still technically like a Padawan level. He's not built his own lightsaber. He's not experienced his trials. He's a Padawan, and a pretty low one at that, in my opinion. Just because, like, yeah, he's got all this power, but his training's been minimal. I mean, it was a freaking little droid that floats around and shoots stunner beams at him. Like, that's the extent of his training at that point. So he essentially just gets this crash course, and I think this is where it's really important to know how powerful he is because like that's what really starts to carry him throughout this. And I kind of I kind of want to talk about how he fails. He fails essentially what is one trial to become a Jedi, which I think was like the trial of the Spirit or something, which was his failure in that, dark force hole where he encounters Luke Vader and cuts off his head. Like that's often compared to one of the trials that a Padawan would get,
Hmm.
and he definitely fails there. And then on top of that, he fails again when he can't pull his X-wing up out of the swamp. And
Right.
so we're seeing this crash course, and he's getting more powerful. He's getting stronger, and he's learning a whole lot, but he's still failing where it counts. You know, and and then that leads straight into his one of his minor successes, which was the Force Vision, where he realized Han and Leia were in trouble at Cloud City, and so you've got multiple failures in his training. So he's absolutely not ready. He's not There's nothing at this point he can do to be a Jedi Knight right then and there. His training's just I mean, they say it a lot in the movie, your training's incomplete. And you're kind of like, without knowing a whole lot of I guess like lore or whatever, you think like, well, he's got enough. Like he can at least hold his own now. But like the thing is like barely. Like not even. I don't think he can really hold his own. And then he jumps straight in his X-wing that Yoda basically just taught him a lesson with, and he's like, "Thanks, but I gotta go." Bye. You know, and it's like, what a very Padawan thing to do, I guess. Um, and then that leads straight into what I would consider his alternate trial to become a Jedi. I don't know if you want to touch on the Yoda stuff before I start to make those connections.
Yeah.
Um,
I wanted to get your thoughts. I know you mentioned it, but like I wanted to circle back and talk a little bit about what you thought about the cave sequence again, because
yeah.
for me, like, it's a very powerful moment.
Hmm.
in like context of everything. Um, but I've always found it so interesting that like Luke is like that's what Luke fears, even though like his only encounter with Vader, if you're just basing it off of the movies, was when he saw him take down Obi-Wan, and then he like was chasing him a little bit in the TIE fighter, but like Luke didn't know that was Vader, or he could have. Let's say for the sake of matter, he does know that that's Vader.
Yeah.
Still, like Luke has never come face to face with Vader, and for him to fear becoming that, while I love it from a thematic standpoint and love what it means for his character, I've never found it to make a lot of sense in
Right.
that moment. Um, Now you can view it as like the Force interprets things both from past, present, and future. Foreshadowing, sort of. It's definitely a foreshadowing, but like
Hmm.
foreshadowing not only the end of Empire, but also the end of Return of the Jedi. Um, but I still am always just, I don't know, I always find it odd that like that
Yeah.
is what Luke is afraid of.
I mean, it
Um,
makes more sense, I guess, like thematically or story wise, more so than it does like when you do a deep dive of character and circumstance and potential, I guess you could say.
mhm.
But yeah, I get what you mean.
So yeah, no, it's just something that I've always found to be kind of odd. Um, but I just figured I'd touch on it. Um, I know you have a ton of thoughts on the Vader fight at the end of
Hmm.
Empire. Um, I mean, I honestly, I like it a lot. I like what it stands for the character. You know, I'm kind of quiet on this episode just because this isn't my forte, but that's kind of the whole point of having people on because I want to talk about things that aren't necessarily my forte sometimes.
Right.
Um, so like you mentioned this was something of like a first trial for Luke or like another
Yeah.
trial. So I'd love to hear
So
more about that.
yeah, so the trials, I guess, in like the Republic, um, I think I read there was like five of them, and sometimes you could knock out multiple trials with one action. So a lot of people say that Luke was first experiencing those challenges of the trials while on Dagobah. Like I said, with the cave being one, um, the lifting of the X-wing being another. I feel like Yoda was testing him early to see if he could do it, essentially. And he failed on both. And so, like we see with Ahsoka Tano, Obi Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, they completed their trials a completely different way, and they did it, basically trial by fire. Ahsoka surviving, the false charges against her, Obi Wan defeating um, Darth Maul, Anakin. All we really get out of Anakin was, service in battle, I guess, in the Clone Wars. But you know, Luke is he's failed his essentially his trials, and so when he heads off to confront Vader, and I mean we know in Return of the Jedi, getting a little ahead of myself here, but we know like his big trial is defeating his own father Vader to become essentially like a Jedi and save the galaxy or whatever. So he's like rushing into his trial without even realizing it. He
Mhm.
just knows like my friends are in trouble, I gotta go. But like Yoda's just proved to him, that you're not ready for this. And he takes off anyways. So what's really cool about that is, you know, he got a crash course and is continuing to get this crash course. He's failed his, I guess official Jedi trials in a way with Yoda. I mean, he only completed two of them and he failed both, I guess you could say. But then he rushes off to what he doesn't realize is his first official like trial by fire in a way. And I mean, he really holds his own there at first in his fight with Vader, and that fight is so powerful because like Vader really just toys with him. I mean, Luke really like. I feel like there's definitely parts of that duel where you really can feel that fear that Luke is having, just trying to hold his own and just even stand up to Vader. And in his mind, he's like, crap. I mean, he's got to be thinking it like, crap, like I done goofed, you know.
Oh yeah.
But that's like the big thing is he rushed off to, even though he didn't know it, he rushed off to his trial by fire, and as we know, I mean, he loses pretty bad. It's lucky, well, it's not lucky, there's reasons why he survived that encounter, but like he survives his trial, which is not something that normally happens outside of the normal galactic standards for their Jedi trials, I guess you could say. Um, so I mean, he survives, and that's really, you know, one of the big things that I wanted to talk about was I mean, he was given chance after chance after chance to become a Jedi, despite not having the same amount of training that the others before him had. Um, and I think that goes to show how powerful he is. Like, even though like he doesn't win against Vader, um, he does stand up to him as much as he can. I mean, I think Vader toys with him quite a bit, and I think Vader doesn't want to kill Luke at all. I mean, he asked Luke to join him and to beat the Emperor and rule as father and son. So I think that was a big part of why Luke was able to survive his trial where others would have failed. But it's interesting to me that he's continuing to fail in his journey to become a Jedi. But all of these failures have taught him the lessons that he needed when he does fully become a Jedi. So yeah, I mean, essentially his whole Jedi training is just failing his trials over and over until he succeeds, in my opinion. Humble opinion, I guess you could say.
No, yeah. There's a lot of trial and error that goes along with everything, and I think that makes Luke Skywalker a far more relatable character. Um,
Yeah.
his just the fact that he fails frequently. The Empire Strikes Back, in general, is about failure on all fronts. There is no happy ending to that movie, um, which is great. It's one of the few times in cinema that they really did that, and I love that.
Hmm.
Um, by that point, of course, they knew they were getting a third film, so that was a little bit easier to handle. Um, but no, I like the idea of viewing the fight with Vader more so as a trial than as like a midpoint or just, an obstacle, um, or just even a setback. Like it's more than that. You know, it seems like, as you mentioned and alluded to, that like with a lot of these central characters of the Force, their trials are events as opposed to like the literal trials. Um, I don't know what it was for Anakin in canon. I don't think that his fight with Dooku was the thing that did it.
No.
Um, in Legends, it was his fight with Asajj Ventress on Yavin 4 that did it, I believe. Was ultimately he walked away from that one and killed Asajj Ventress.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, so they fought on Yavin 4, and that was ultimately what did it for him. We know Obi-Wan was his trial with, or his duel with Maul. Um, Luke, I mean, doesn't really have one, but you can say here is the thing with Vader. Um, and unfortunately, I'm not jumping ahead too much here, but like we don't
Right.
have a ton of canon material set between Empire and Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Um, while I like to look at his fight with Vader as a trial, obviously it's one that he did not pass.
Hmm.
Um, so we don't really know what kind of other training Luke had between Empire and Return of the Jedi. Um, he's far more powerful though. When
Yes.
we get back to him, I have a funny feeling that he doesn't have any wisdom from Ben. I keep calling him Ben because it's the original trilogy, but like I feel like I feel like Obi-Wan wasn't there for him the whole time.
Yeah,
If
well,
at
and I mean,
all.
when Luke leaves Dagobah, I mean, Obi-Wan tells him like, "You're on your own. I can't help you with this." And I feel like that extends all the way through into Return of the Jedi up until he returns to Yoda. Is when Ben finally comes back, and that's when they have their conversation. But uh, but yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what happens between Empire and Return of the Jedi, and I can start jumping into some stuff right here unless you got more to add.
No, I don't really do. I wanted to add the tidbit that like as a character, it feels like Luke was doubted. Um, at that
Yeah,
point, um,
yeah,
not too much. Obi-Wan kind of supports him. Doesn't He's not happy with his decisions, but like Obi-Wan supports him as the person that's meant to do this. Meanwhile, Yoda still believes that Leia is the person that he should have been training the whole time, which I
yeah.
think is so interesting. Um, and
Oh
not
yeah,
something I want to
that's
dive
a good
into
bit.
too much, but like it was teased in Empire all those years ago, and it's canon now that like
Yeah.
Yoda's plan was to train Leia, not Luke. And then Obi-Wan brought him Luke and was kind of like, all right, I guess I have to deal with this. Um, in the Star Wars Infinities comic series, which we've touched on a little bit, Luke dies at the beginning of Empire from his wounds from the Wampa. Leia ends up going to Dagobah, training with Yoda there, and she ultimately takes down everybody, which is pretty cool. Um,
Yeah.
but no, like
Yeah,
I
that's
like
awesome.
that that's a dynamic for Luke's character as well. I don't know if he ever knew, but like it's something to consider that like
I
Yoda,
think he learns it
yeah,
after Yoda passes, like right after. I think he realizes it with that conversation with Obi-Wan or shortly after.
yeah. I don't know if I'd agree with that necessarily, but like I get where you're coming from with that one.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think he ever knew. Looking, I think by that point, like that's just salt in the wound that you don't need.
Right.
He defeated the Emperor anyway, so like, does it
Yeah.
really matter?
Right.
Um, Maybe later in life, after he connects with Yoda again, that's a conversation that they could have had.
Hmm.
But by that point, like, who cares? And obviously, we see in the Last Jedi that like Leia is still a very powerful Force user, just in her own right. Um, and I can't remember if it's canon or not. I feel like at some point Leia, after Return of the Jedi, was attempted to train with Luke, and ultimately just let it go in terms of in replacement of politics. I
I
feel like
feel
that.
like
I feel like that's canon.
yeah, I feel like something was said in Last Jedi about training with Luke a little bit, but not finishing or something like that.
Yeah, that might have been where I got it from. I really got to rewatch some of these movies.
I watched it
Um,
not too long ago, but even I'm forgetting.
yeah, no. I definitely think that. Oh, excuse me. Um, that Leia is very powerful. I don't know if she's more. She could be more powerful, honestly,
Maybe.
just without just a lot of untapped potential. Um, but I just like that you're adding that to Luke Skywalker's character dynamic of like, as a character, he wasn't really intended to be put in this position,
Right.
and yet he is. And I think that that plays greatly into something we'll touch on later, which is The Last Jedi and the legend of Luke Skywalker and how that consumed him.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but we'll move on to Return of the Jedi because there's a lot to cover in there as well.
Oh yeah, this is such good stuff.
I
Such
love
good
this
stuff.
stuff.
So so the main thing here, I mean, Return of the Jedi starts. I don't. Is it ever said how much time passes between Empire and Return of the Jedi? I think it's like
I'd say
again a
another
couple of
like
years.
2-3 years.
Right. So who knows what I mean, why didn't Luke just go back to Dagobah then? I have no idea. All right, that doesn't make a whole lot of
I mean,
sense to me.
they're doing the comic series right now. They're getting really close. The main Star Wars line is getting really close to Empire, and then I'm sure they're
Okay.
gonna fly through Empire because you already know the story of Empire, and
Yeah.
then presumably they will jump into the period between Empire and Return of the Jedi. Um,
Yeah.
I have a
Which
feeling that I've read somewhere or somehow that like there were rebellion obligations that occurred that like
that would make sense.
prevented Luke from going back. And that's kind of these or just the search for Han. One thing we didn't even think of that. Like the fact
Yep.
that they're looking for Han is a big deal. Um, and I find it similar almost to like why Han Solo never went back and paid Jabba the Hutt was like there were just so much going on that they never got around to it.
Yeah.
But now that the mission for Han was done, Luke decided to go back. So I think a main reason of that would be the search for Han was a big part of that.
Yeah. I would agree for the most part. Yeah. But either way, we get Luke with, new force powers that he didn't have before. He's using actually what I would consider a dark side power with the force choke, but I'm not one to point fingers.
Oh yeah.
So, he struts straight into Jabba's place, chokes out the Gamorrean guards, and he's just like, "Yo, like you're gonna make this happen right now." And we see him fail the mind trick against Jabba, but we see him use it against whatever Jabba's assistant's name was. I can't remember. Um, so the neat thing here, I guess I should say, instead of walking through everything that happens, is like Luke just came off of a huge failure, right? He failed his trial. He lost his arm, and he had to recover. And the big takeaway here is that he didn't let that defeat break him. He took that defeat and he trained harder. And I'm assuming he took a lot of the fundamentals that Yoda taught him, and he just continued that over and over and over. And I'm assuming. I mean, I don't necessarily think that Obi-Wan was in contact with him throughout this whole time. So I'm assuming he was training on his own and just figuring things out, which I think would be super difficult. But he uh, trains himself, is what I'm guessing, and he comes back in the movie. We get Return of the Jedi. He's got these new powers, and we later it gets revealed he's got a brand new freaking lightsaber
Yeah.
with a green blade. And holy crap, is it beautiful, right? And so a thing that I want to touch on is that you know part of becoming a Jedi, especially like Padawans, is I think I want to say I had heard it at some point that you make your own lightsaber when you become a Jedi Knight, but I think you do it as a Padawan in canon now.
Yeah.
And it's like a level of training that once you make your own lightsaber, you're ready for the next step, whatever that step may be, whether it be joining up with a knight to be, a Jedi Knight's Padawan or
Yeah, no,
whatever.
there's a whole you actually do it as a youngling.
Yeah.
But like right
Well, that's
before you
right. There's
become a
that
Padawan.
episode.
Yeah, there's a whole
Yeah.
arc in Clone Wars about it.
Yeah.
It's
I
more of a
think
youngling pre-Padawan thing now.
Yeah,
Um,
see, I preferred it as being like I think in Legends there was like the young there was the book series about Han and Leia's kids at the Jedi Academy where Luke taught them or whatever. I don't remember the names of those books. They were like young adult books.
yeah, those aren't that wouldn't be my knowledgeable field.
Yeah, I mean
Jedi
really old
Academy
books.
probably.
Yeah,
It
but I
might just be
know like part of their thing, like at least in Legends, was they would creating their own lightsaber was like that first big step into becoming a Jedi Knight or whatever. But maybe it's Padawan. I don't remember. Man, it's all crap anyways. I'm just kidding.
no.
But
No, yeah, I think that it's interesting because there's very different canonical aspects to building a
yeah,
lightsaber now.
right.
On one hand, you have the younglings pre-Padawan, like your first trip to Ilum. You find your crystal, you build your blade, all that stuff like that. That's canon. And
Yep.
then you kind of have some wiggle room of like do you go through that trial again when you build a second lightsaber? If you need a replacement lightsaber, how does that work? Like,
Yeah.
obviously, Ahsoka um, builds a second lightsaber at some point in the Clone Wars. Does she have to go through those trials again in order to build that lightsaber? Probably not. Like, you probably just go find another crystal that calls to you, build that lightsaber, all that kind of stuff. And by that point, she's practically a Jedi Knight.
Yeah.
Um, she's pretty close. Um, she was that was season 3. Obviously, she didn't get her trial until the end of season 5. But like
Right.
in the terms of in a time where Jedi Padawans were getting promoted to knighthood super early,
Mhm.
which is a whole other conversation. But like you've got that, then you've got characters like Obi-Wan, who was promoted to knight and built a new lightsaber because he lost his in the fight against Maul. Um, so like again, probably didn't have to go through the same types of trials to build a new lightsaber. Um,
Right.
there's a lot of different aspects to building lightsabers canonically. Like again, like we don't know how Ahsoka built her white bladed lightsabers. We don't even know how white bladed crystals work. Maybe
Right.
we do. I don't know. At least I don't know.
They look
Um,
good.
and you've got all sorts of trials. Like even from a dark side perspective, you've got you have to bleed a Jedi Knight's crystal, or just a Jedi crystal from a lightsaber. You have to bleed the light side of the Force out of that crystal, and it makes it red. And then you've got other situations where like Kylo screwed his up, so he screwed up bleeding his blade, and now his lightsaber's all fucked up.
Yeah.
Um, so you've got stuff like that. Um, so as for Luke seemed like a pretty straightforward way. If you take the Return of the Jedi deleted scene as canon, then he didn't have a lightsaber from for the 3 years in between because he built that lightsaber like right before he went to Jabba's palace. I'm pretty sure, like I'm 99% sure something recently disputed that, and it was a story very shortly after Empire Strikes Back that included his green lightsaber. So that kind of removes that deleted scene from canon. So obviously he
Okay.
built it much sooner. But like there's so much mystery behind that lightsaber still. Like, is that crystal Qui-Gon's? Like there's still a lot of theories that think that Luke went back to Obi-Wan's hut and found Qui-Gon's lightsaber and took the crystal from that. There's just a lot of things that we don't know. Like I'm very interested in seeing that story. I'm more interested in seeing Luke go to Ilum or somewhere else. I mean, at this point, the Kyber crystal supply is so limited that I think it might just be Qui-Gon's because between the Jedha excavation, the Ilum excavation, and the theory now. I mean, this was pre the Force Awakens, but there's a theory now that Star Killer Base is Ilum, and that, like they were just coring into the planet for more supplies. And they literally converted the planet Ilum into a super weapon. But anyway, I'm very interested in seeing that story of how Luke developed his lightsaber. I'm also super interested in seeing how Luke developed the ability to use the Force choke
Yeah.
because I like the idea of seeing a story where Luke stumbled upon some ancient Sith or Jedi texts and like he ultimately either read some wrong information or adapted some Sith techniques accidentally and like used that ability. There's so much untapped potential in that time span for people to explore.
Yeah.
You have anything else on that time period before we kind of jump straight into Return of the Jedi?
Um, I think that's about it. I mean, we kind of touched a bit on the lightsaber reveal in Jedi, so we don't really see a whole lot of force powers. I think in that battle on the barge. Um,
Um, no, not really. It's more lightsaber action.
yeah, just swinging that thing around, knocking people left and right. So yeah, I mean, I guess at that point we can jump straight to um his going back to Dagobah and talking with Yoda and Obi-Wan. Um, which if you're ready to do that, yeah, we should jump right in.
Yeah, no, let's get into it.
So this I think is pretty neat because at this point we're like, okay, he's trained a bit, he's made his own lightsaber, like, all right, what else has Yoda got for him at this point? And we get back and Yoda's like on his deathbed, you know, and what's really cool is that in his talks with Yoda, he's like, "I'll come back, complete my training. Like, you got to do this." And Yoda's like, "Nah, like you're done." And
Yeah.
then he says, "So I am a Jedi," and Yoda just laughs at him. Like, "No, you're not a Jedi. You haven't completed your trials yet, dude. Your trial, the one you failed, and then the few you failed before that, even. Like, yeah, you trained hard." You learned some new skills. You built a new lightsaber. You're just about there, but you still got to complete your trial. In my opinion, that's the last big thing. So, we get that conversation. That's when Luke finds out about Leia. Um, Yoda passes away. Obi-Wan comes in. Luke's like, you know, you lied. He's like, well, certain point of view bullshit. You know,
I love that line.
man, I
I love that
used to
so
kind of
much.
like it, but like now I'm just like, fuck the Jedi. Like you're such a shithead, Obi-Wan. But yeah, I'm definitely more of a Sith guy at this point. I don't know.
Nate.
I don't know. I think I have to, man. I don't know. I think I have to. But either way, regardless, I think Luke learns a little lesson about himself, getting some of that news and the realization that like he's not going to be a Jedi until he confronts Vader. And the interesting thing, I don't think they necessarily say defeat Vader. I think they say confront Vader.
Yeah, that sounds
I
about
might be
right.
wrong, which is interesting because he already confronted Vader and lost
Well, I think
pretty
that Obi
badly.
Wan wants him to kill Vader. Obviously, Obi Wan doesn't think he's worth redeeming.
Right? Yeah, and I think Yoda felt the same way for sure.
Yeah, Yoda's a lot more mysterious, but like we get that line. I don't know if it's in Empire. I think it's in Return of the Jedi where um Luke says to Vader that like he can be redeemed, and Vader goes, "Obi Wan once thought as you did,"
Hmm.
which we still haven't seen in canon. We have no idea. I'd
Yeah.
like to see that story too, um,
Yeah.
but like you get that like background, and now you can see that Obi Wan's kind of changed tunes. I don't really want to put words in Yoda's mouth. I guess I don't really
Right.
know what his thoughts on it were. I would assume that Yoda's more purpose was just more the eradication of the Sith period,
Yeah.
by all means necessary. I think Yoda's concern has always been more about the Emperor, and then Obi Wan's has always been more about Anakin.
I don't know. I feel like Yoda said you must defeat Vader,
I
but
don't
I
know. I
might
haven't
be
seen that
wrong.
movie. I don't watch the movies that often. I should probably have rewatched it for this conversation, but
I didn't think
I
to
didn't think
watch
we'd be
that
playing
part.
dialogue. I didn't think we'd be playing the
Right. Yeah.
dialogue game.
Either way, I guess in the long term it doesn't particularly matter. But I mean, we get a lot of good stuff there, and I think that's definitely like a turning point for Luke. I feel like he makes a big decision there, and that decision is I'm going to go my own way and try to turn my father good again.
Oh yeah. Um, I like that scene on the catwalk of the base on Endor. Just like
Yeah,
the whole sequence of them talking and the ignition of the igniting the new lightsaber.
I love that
Um,
scene.
it's something that I want to rewatch. I need to rewatch Return of the Jedi. It might
Yeah.
be the film that I haven't seen in the longest amount of time. That or Attack of the Clones. Um, I have to rewatch both of those. Um, but no, like as somebody who does, as I said, I keep enforcing this point, not to be a jerk, but just because it matters to the conversation. Like I'm not that big of a fan of Luke Skywalker. Um,
Right.
so to see what he's going through and like who his character is, like it's great. I really like all that. Um,
Yeah.
And that scene on the catwalk definitely is a good confrontation moment between the two
I
that
loved it.
ultimately leads to the throne room scene as well.
Yeah,
Or
and I think at
yeah,
this point we should probably go to the throne room scene, which is pretty much the biggest thing that I mean, it's the start of his trial.
right.
So if you're ready,
I'm always ready, Nate. Are you
you're always
ready?
ready. I don't know if I'm ready.
You're ready.
I I watched this scene before we started talking, and I've been thinking about it since yesterday. So there's so much to like kind of unpack here. So this is Luke instead of Luke going to fight Vader, beat him, and kill the Emperor and win, Luke decides I'm not going to do that. I'm going to try to turn my father. He won't turn me over to the Emperor, and it's not going to play out the way everyone says it's going to play out.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Yeah. Long
But
story short, long story short, it does play out that way.
yeah,
Vader does turn him over to the Emperor because I mean at that point I think Vader is conflicted. I think, Vader didn't want to kill him in Empire, and I think when Luke came to him, Vader was expecting it, but kind of hoping he wouldn't, but kind of knew he would. I think there was some what do you call it? Conflict. I think there was some conflict in Vader and like what I want for him versus what I'm expected to want for him. And I think at that point he had almost even given up the idea that him and Luke would take out the Emperor together and rule. I think he had given up on that plan. I think he knew that wasn't going to happen. But I think he still wanted Luke to either turn, or he also wanted Luke to never show up at all and just run, and I don't think he really wanted to fight his own son.
mm,
I think that there's definitely some conflict in his head, and his actions don't necessarily show that. But I think it's still there, and Luke calls him out on it later on. But first things first, I mean, Vader takes him straight to the Emperor. He's like, "Look, your friends are getting demolished because this station's operational, and we're gonna blow up your ships." And this is what I really love about Return of the Jedi and why I love this movie so much is that throne room scene. Well, I guess there's multiple parts to all that, but we see Luke standing there, and I feel like Mark Hamill's acting here is great because Luke's staring out that window, and this entire time he's mentally trying to fight off the dark side. I feel like as soon as he got up there and the conversation started, he felt that pressure from the dark side. I feel like I mean, as powerful as the Emperor plus Vader together, I feel like that pressure on him was just so great. And I think in some points you can kind of see that in the physicality of Mark Hamill's acting. But the pressure is so, so great there. And he's trying to mentally, you know, push off the dark side that's really just trying to smother him and consume him. And that in itself takes I mean, he's 1 on 2. It's a two. I mean, it's a 2 on 1. Luke's got to be powerful if he's taking on the Emperor and Vader mentally with the Force and the light and the dark combating all within him at the same time. You know, and then you've got the Emperor and Vader both, throwing their jabs at him. Like, the station's quite operational. You know, Luke is Luke is doing everything he possibly can to not only win, survive, not turn to the dark side, but also turn Vader good again. He's got a lot on his plate, and it really shows that raw power and potential that Luke has. And one thing that I really want to note is the Emperor says, I can feel your anger, I can feel your hatred, and Luke can't handle that 2 on 1. I think he's losing that 2 on 1 at that point. He cannot handle the pressure of the dark side at that point. And Luke seems to brush it off and push away when he's like, "No, I'm not going to get my lights. I'm gonna strike you down." He turns away. He looks back out the window and immediately just turns right back around and pulls his lightsaber into his hand, and that's when Vader stops him like with that blade. Boom. Like, no, I'm not gonna let you kill him. It could be said at this point, just to dive into Vader's head for a minute, Vader could have just let Luke kill the Emperor, you know?
Mhm.
Like, I don't think there was any real benefit to Vader not letting Luke do that in a way. If you think if Vader's as selfish as I think he could be, there's there's something to be said. I mean, did he stop Luke to let the Emperor live, or did he stop Luke from turning to the dark side in that moment, or did he? Oh, I don't know. I mean, what do you think about that?
No, there's a lot of really deep character moments between all three of the characters in that scene. It's a lot to digest. Um, I definitely think that you're right about Luke being tempted the entire sequence, and having to like mentally fight that off. Um, I like the idea of Vader both physically and thematically blocking Luke from succumbing to the dark side.
Yeah,
Um, and whether or not Vader is trying to protect the Emperor or protect his son is a really interesting debate, that I have never really considered, that I think would be something interesting to talk about with other people. Um,
hmm
but I also like the idea that has been set up that essentially in canon, we know that the Emperor had a million plans in his head, half of which didn't include Vader. And even Vader himself had plans all the way back in the 19-year period between episodes 3 and 4 of like overthrowing the Emperor. Um, and you going back to Return of the Jedi, like you have to consider like, was Vader, did Vader want to kill the Emperor at that point? Did Vader, obviously Vader wanted to rule the galaxy with Luke. We learned that in The Empire Strikes Back.
yeah,
Um, it's that common theme of the dark side of, master and apprentice, rule of two, one who holds the power and one to take it. Um, and kind of passing on that lineage, I definitely think that Vader wanted Luke to succumb to the dark side, but not in that way. Um, because maybe Vader even knew that like Luke was more powerful than him already, and Luke could probably have killed both of them if he had succumbed to the
yeah,
dark side, and Luke could have taken on a different apprentice. And I think Vader definitely wanted to hold the power for at least a little while. Um, Whether or not the Death Star was really part of that plan or not remains to be seen. The more that we learn about Palpatine and canon, the less and less I think that the Death Stars were really an important part of his plan. It seems like a lot of what, this is kind of getting off on a tangent, but like it seems like a lot of what Sheev was developing and wanting was a lot more than just like galactic conquest. I think it's been established, and I also definitely agree that like that was below him. He was above that, but it was just part of the plan and part of the front. I think ultimately Sheev was desperately looking for unlimited force potential and power and unlimited life force. Those are the two things that I think he was desperately seeking, and I think a lot of that will play into episode 9 too, which is really exciting. Um,
yeah.
but I digress. Going back to the throne room, I do like the idea that Vader is blocking Luke from succumbing to the dark side, but it also maybe he's blocking him because Vader wants the kill blow on the Emperor himself. Um,
Right. On that note, I have a hypothetical for you. Do you think that if Vader had beat Luke in that fight but didn't kill him, that Vader would have turned on the Emperor and then told Luke like, "You're my apprentice now"?
I don't know. Are you assuming in that hypothetical that Luke would turn to the dark side?
Yes. Assuming that Luke would turn at that point because he was beaten so thoroughly by Vader, and Vader would, I guess, some sort of dark side control at that point to really mess with him, fuck with his head.
Then I would say yes, probably. I
I
think
find that,
that I think Vader and the Emperor knew that the combined forces of Vader and Luke were unstoppable at that point.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I would
I
agree.
always question how powerful Vader was at that point in his life. He's pretty old.
Yeah.
Um, and like obviously we see him super weak when he dies, but a lot of that is attributed to the fact that he was just shocked by a bunch of force lightning.
Mhm.
Um, we see how he is in Rogue One. Um, we see how he is in the Darth Vader comic, but those are a lot closer. Those are,
Yeah.
oh, I don't know. The Vader comic's probably about trying to get my timeline straight. Probably let's lowball and say 15 years before Return of the Jedi, and then Rogue One is obviously about 5 years before Return, or yeah, 5 or
Yeah.
6 years before Return of the Jedi. Um, so obviously Vader's still pretty powerful. He
Mhm.
fights pretty well against Luke, but obviously you're limited by like what you could have done action wise in the
Yeah.
early 1980s. Um,
Well, I got some theories on that too. Actually, there's things I want to touch on because I just watched it before we started this talk.
go ahead. What do you got?
So at that point the duel starts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean we see essentially right off the bat Luke holding his own, probably just as good if not better than an Empire. But you know I mean I'm trying to think. I just watched it and I'm brain farting already. I feel like Vader is still toying with Luke in that duel at first, but not as much as in Empire. I know Luke kicks him and he like flips down the stairs and that's pretty cool. And then Luke's like, "Yo, I'm not gonna fight you." He's like, "All right, I kicked you down the stairs. Like, I've come to my senses. This isn't what I want. I don't want to fight you. I want you to leave with me. Turn back to the light. Screw the Emperor. Like, fuck it all. Let's just dip. You're better than this." And Vader, of course, comes back up. Unwise to lower your defenses, all that jazz. And I think Luke's he's fending him off. We see that sweet forced backflip jump, and then we see the first lightsaber throw ever. Um,
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of that.
yeah, and then at that point, Luke's hiding. He had just baited Vader with like, I feel the conflict in you, like you're better than this, whatever. And the whole time the Emperor's just giggling like a schoolgirl. Um, and then Luke's hiding, and I think in that moment, because we see him like sitting down in the dark. I feel like he's trying to get a grip on himself because he's been under that pressure of the dark side that whole time. He lost his cool. He kind of regained his composure, but then he's still fighting his dad, and he's kind of running. He's backtracking a whole lot at that point, and I think at this moment he's trying to catch a breather. He's trying to get his emotions and stuff under control because he is very very on edge. And
Yeah.
then the thing I really want to bring up here, and this is a parallel actually to the second Anakin Dooku fight from Revenge of the Sith. Vader taunts Luke throughout all of that, and as soon as Vader brings up, your sister, maybe she'll be turned. Luke loses it. He snaps, and just like we see in Revenge of the Sith with Anakin, he taps into that anger. And in my opinion, I don't know if it was choreographed this way or not, but in my opinion, Luke swings. I mean, they get wild and crazy right underneath that little catwalk thing or wherever they are.
Mm-hmm.
But that I think in that point, he's tapped into that anger and that dark side a bit, and then that's when his force power really starts to push back and push against Vader. And I think that's why Vader. That's part of the reason why Vader's backing up. The strength of Luke's strikes, even if they're missing, plus just that weight of Luke's, potential power, like raw power with the Force, I think Vader's really feeling that. And he's backtracking. And we get a cool little clip. And I think in this little clip, this is shortly before um, they back up to the edge of the pit. in my opinion, the lightsaber duel is so much better after, Luke's wild swings. They come out from underneath whatever they were under, and if you watch, like, Luke is quick, precise, powerful in all of his strikes, and Vader is just backtracking, struggling just to deflect everything. And Luke, I mean, he is on it. I always think, like, how could someone with so little training in the Force, beat Vader, the GOAT, right? And it really is a testament to how strong and how much like force power Luke has, just that raw power, and we see it. And I think a Darth Luke would be a very frightening thing. I mean, I think it's worse than Vader and the Emperor together. Um, and we see Luke use that raw power to just really beat down Vader. Vader held his own, but like once Luke cut off his hand, Vader was kind of on the ground. He'd been beat. I think he was feeling every single one of those strikes he deflected all the way through what little bones he had left. And I really feel like that Luke's strikes definitely were damaging, his robotic limbs, and the pressure of just that overall rage that Luke was exhibiting at that moment, I think wore him out. I think he was done at that point. I mean, he was so thoroughly beaten mentally and physically that there was no way. I mean, and then Luke comes to his senses again and is like, "That's it. I've won. I've beat you. Yeah, I used the dark side to do it, I guess, but I'm not going to be a Sith. I'm not going to turn bad." And that right there was, I think, Luke's great trial. Not just beating Vader or beating the Emperor. I think it was coming to terms with the fact that he brushed up with and even used the dark side and was able to come back from it and realize what he did was wrong. And even though he, I guess, achieved a goal, it wasn't what he wanted. He's still able to come back from it. And in that moment is when I feel like he's actually a Jedi. When he threw away his lightsaber, he said, "No, no more. Like I will not do this." And boom, Jedi Knight right there, calling it.
Would you say Jedi Knight or Jedi Master?
I would say I would say Knight. I would say Knight, but that's only because I don't think he has the knowledge to really be like a master, quote unquote. I think masterhood comes with time, and I don't think he's put in that time yet. So I think at that point he's literally become a Jedi Knight just like he dreamed, or I
Well,
guess
because
not
it
really
makes you.
dreamed, but like his goal was to be Jedi Knight, and I think that beating it, beating Vader, getting through the trial, turning down the dark side, Jedi Knight. That's it right there.
Well, the
In my
reason I ask is because in the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when Han's in carbon or comes out of carbon freezing, and he's in the jail cell with Chewie,
mm,
Chewie's ranting off, and Han Solo goes, "Luke's a Jedi Knight. What are you talking about?"
right.
So
Yeah.
I
I
think he's
think.
identifying himself as a knight at the
Yeah.
start. And I wouldn't say he's a full blown master either
Right.
at that moment, but I
I
think that
think he's falsely identifying himself. Honestly, I think he feels. But in my opinion, he hasn't beaten his trial yet, and so I think he's wrong
okay,
to call himself a
I
knight.
like that. I mean I didn't think of it that way, but no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I mean I agree with all sentiments on what you said. Um,
And there's
something that
something to be said too about the physicality of watching that scene. Like everything I'm describing, you can in a way physically see, which is one of the best parts about the whole movie to me.
no, absolutely. Um, and something that I'm going to tie in more directly with things like The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, is this moment of pacification for Luke and the throwing away of the saber and the "I don't want to fight anymore," um, which ties directly back into The Last Jedi, which we'll get into. Um, but like this moment of the refusal of the fight, not to connect this to the hero's journey, but just like refusing to fight anymore. He sees
Mhm.
what he's done. In his mind, in my opinion, the cutting off of Vader's arm and that unleashing of the rage was as close to the dark side as he was going to get. And he said, I'm not going to fight because fighting will lead to the dark side for me. So he
Yeah.
throws away the saber. And then ultimately we get the whole arc of like Palpatine shooting him with lightning and then Vader killing the Emperor, blah, blah, blah. That doesn't really
Mhm.
pertain too much to Luke's overall story.
Right.
Um,
One thing I
Luke's.
want to side note real quick
Go ahead.
here. Um, Vader kills the Emperor, which is what everyone assumed he would do or kills Palpatine, I guess, who is the Sith Lord. Everyone assumed that would happen, when he was Anakin, and that would bring balance to the Force. And so, in this moment, I think, in a way, the balance of power within the Force has shifted back to the side of good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though the good Jedi are still outnumbered by the evil Jedi, the light side of the Force in that moment is is more powerful than the dark side. And then Vader takes out the Emperor, dies himself. So then the all of the light side of the Force is in power at that point. There are no Sith at that point in movie terms, right?
Right. Well, no,
So
even in literal terms, I'm pretty
yeah,
sure at that point.
so the balance of power has shifted from the dark to the light. But again, we see that shift, when the shift came from the light to the dark with Anakin killing everyone and Order 66 killing everyone, it was too far to one side, which is what messed up the balance. And then we see it again shift the complete other way with Luke
Yeah, I'm glad
at
you
the end
mentioned
of
that.
Return of the Jedi. And then that's what breeds the First Order is that balance of power has shifted so far again to the other side that when one side's too strong, the Force is gonna produce someone to even it out.
Well, it's like that quote from Snoke. I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up because I was going to ask you about like, is the Force really in balance? Which I'm glad you brought that up.
Right.
But you get that quote from Snoke of like, darkness rises and light to meet it.
Hmm.
And more importantly, the phrasing of that of darkness is the one that rises and the light to meet it, not the light
Right.
rising and
Yeah.
the darkness to meet it, which is what happens at the end of Return of the Jedi. Obviously, is the light rises and then the dark to meet it with the First Order, like you mentioned. But by
Yeah.
the time of the Last Jedi, you've got darkness rising and then the light to meet it in terms of Rey.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think it's necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio. Um, in terms of like you've alluded to this a couple of times of like the number of Jedi versus the number of Sith.
Hmm.
I don't think it's a direct correlation because even we see in the prequels that there are thousands of Jedi, tens of thousands of Jedi, and we'll count the Clone Wars characters. So there's like
Yeah.
5 Sith around right now, roughly,
Hmm.
maybe 6. And like the balance is still all over the place because
Yeah.
like the dark side energy just like consumes so much more. Um that you feel there's like an improper balance in the force and most of that comes from Palpatine because of how powerful he is.
Yeah.
But I digress.
So
Um
in the midst of that digression, though, I kind of have a hot take for you.
okay.
So at the end of the Last Jedi, uh, you know, man, all right, I feel like I'm really putting myself in a spot saying this.
It's okay.
So granted, I mean we haven't seen Episode 9 yet, but I feel like the very end of the Last Jedi and the very beginning of Episode 9, whenever that happens, I feel like that's going to be the point where the Force is actually in balance. Now, I don't think the power ratio is in balance, but I think there is balance there because we see the little kid use the Force. I mean, of course, he's not a light side or dark side user; he just has the Force. But I think that with Kylo killing Snoke, the two Force users that we see on screen at that point, it's Kylo and Rey, and in my opinion, fairly evenly matched, at least at that point. And to me, that shows forces imbalance. And granted, the ratio of power though is still skewed more towards the First Order, but I think the Force in general, and then we're seeing other Force users pop up, and I feel like we're going to see maybe some Force users with the Knights of Ren, and we're seeing some other people who are probably going to pop up to match that. And I think this is the most balanced we're actually going to see the Force in all of these movies. Is the moments that right there at the end of Last Jedi.
Um, I don't know. I get where you're coming from,
Yeah,
but I'm more of in the belief that by the end of 9, that's where we're going to be.
I hope so. I mean, I don't know, man. I don't know.
I
I
have
don't
this
want one
weird.
side to win over the other.
I mean, like, I feel like we're gonna have one side win over the other. But I think that there's certainly a theme of balance in this sequel trilogy where
Yeah,
by the end of episode 9, we are going to have a situation where there is some balance. And I think that it more comes from not that there are an equal number of whatever of Sith or Jedi, but the fact that by the end of 9, there will be no Sith or Jedi. You will have the
yeah,
Skywalkers, and the Skywalkers are the new terminology for Force users, and they encompass aspects of both the light and the dark, and they are essentially gray Jedi, but they don't go by that term anymore. Just all Force users from moving from episode 9 forward will be titled Skywalkers,
yeah.
and there is a
I
certain
feel like
balance shift with those characters.
yeah, I feel like that's the route we're gonna go.
So like you're not
Honestly,
wrong
yeah.
necessarily. I
It's
just
my hot
think that
take.
like yeah. I'm not saying you're wrong. I just think that the way that they're going to achieve balance in 9 is a little different than what you're thinking.
Yeah. No, I know what you mean. Yeah, I'm following.
Do you have any more thoughts on I almost said episode 9. We'll talk about episode 9. Do you have any more thoughts on Return of the Jedi? Because before we kind of like dive into like the 40-year gap between 40-year gap between 6 and 7.
The not really the main thing that I wanted to talk about was ends with Return of the Jedi and Luke's journey to become a Jedi Knight, and I think that's technically when it happens, even though he claims otherwise. So like my big thing is kind of like done there, but I'm perfectly capable of continuing the conversation with where he is at the end of like the Last Jedi or within that movie. So
Um, well, no, I wanted to kind of touch on sort of we know very little about Luke Skywalker between 6 and 7.
yeah,
We know following the events of the Battle of Endor, trying to remember the timeline of Battlefront 2 campaign.
hmm
So like he goes and gets the
which I
compass.
still haven't completed yet. Jeez.
He's going to get the compass.
Yep.
I'm trying to. That's. It's got to be post Battle of Endor because you start at the Battle of Endor with
Yes.
the campaign. I don't think there's any flashbacks in that game.
As far as I've played, there hasn't been.
No. Have you played the Luke Skywalker level yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so then there we go. So that takes place post Battle of Endor. He's hunting Jedi relics. He's hunting Jedi texts. He's looking to build his own order. As I said, we don't know a ton about that. And then the next information we kind of get is like after he's already built the temple or visited the temple, after he started training and taking on Force users. I'm not going to jump into heavy speculation about Kylo Ren and the Knights of Ren and how that all involves. If you're interested in that conversation, head over to the episode where Alex and I talked about Kylo Ren. We have a lot of in-depth conversations about how Kylo and Luke factor in everything and all that. But for Luke, sort of by this point, he's built up this legend of Luke Skywalker, and how that I guess it did go to his head. I didn't want to say that like the power and like the legend had gone to his head, but it did.
Yeah.
And how he was trying to be something he wasn't.
We had argued and talked about that early on when we first met.
Yeah.
Because I remember some of those late night conversations where I had a little too much to drink, and that's what we talked about.
Oh yeah, I remember now. But no, I mean, for me, like the power has gone to Luke's head, and he even admits this in The Last Jedi. Like he had built such a legend around him that like he couldn't withstand it, and he was trying to build something of ancient time and trying to rebuild this Jedi Order in a way that probably wasn't best fit for him.
Yeah.
And by doing so, he lets Snoke creep into Kylo, and we know how all that went down. Um, and just, that failure, and now him going into hiding as a result of that. Um, it's pretty straightforward. I like the ideas that are there, and it's hard to talk about it super in depth without having a lot of information. A lot of my older Luke points come from like The Last Jedi and where he stands on that. Um, but well, this is just kind of going up to The Force Awakens. Like, do you have any thoughts on any of that era? Like, obviously, there's nothing you could have read, nothing you could check out. This
Um,
book should give us some information that we talked about earlier, The Secrets of the Jedi.
yeah. I mean, my whole thing is I don't really have anything leading up to that. I guess I could touch on it a little bit. Is Luke when he beat Vader and survived and became a Jedi Knight at the end of Return of the Jedi, he thought he'd made it, and that would be it. Um, and I think that's kind of the problem with Luke's character that we see the outcome of in The Last Jedi is that in a way I think um, he stopped being as vigilant in defending himself mentally from the dark side. I think there was no chance he would turn again, but I think that once he won, he thought the battle was done, and I think that there was a lot of vigilance that he didn't he didn't pursue there, and I think that's why. I mean, of course, Snoke crept in or whatever, but I think it all comes down to Luke thinking that he had won the final battle, and that definitely wasn't the case, and that just shows kind of in a way his ego at that point. Um, so that's really the only thing I can think of is leading into the Last Jedi. His ego has brought him there at that point,
No,
which I guess
yeah.
is kind of a rude way to say it, but it was his lack of vigilance in his own mental fortitude and training on in that respect, um, and that led to everything that happened.
Yeah, no. Agree with all that. There's not much to talk about in The Force Awakens. It all kind of ties back together. Um, now, I, I don't remember. Like, I know you're not like a hater of The Last Jedi. I know you like The Last Jedi.
Hmm.
Um, how do you feel about Luke as a character in that movie? Do
I
you
love it.
like what they did? Okay, there you go.
I love it.
Um,
To me, it works.
yeah,
It works. I mean, people are like, "Oh, it's not my Luke." Like, fuck right off. Like, let's be real. Like, at me right now. Like, fuck right off. You don't know how Luke is. All right, I do. I'm the one that's studying it right now. Anyways, the main thing is like, sure, we don't see the mannerisms or the attitude or just the overall old man grumpiness because he's none of those things in the original trilogy. But when you really think about who he is and where he's at, why he's there in The Last Jedi, it makes complete sense. Like, shit happened. When he thought he had won the final battle, he got snuck up on and, ambushed, and he lost bad. And he didn't just lose bad, he lost so bad that his family member, like his close relative, was in a way gone because of it,
right.
and he was even ready to kill his own family member out of fear. Like,
Oh
he
yeah,
thought he'd won, and then all of a sudden he realizes, oh shit, like I definitely let things get out of hand, and now I might have to kill my own nephew. And then it's again that moment where he brushes with the dark side, and then he says, "I'm not going to do this." But in the Last Jedi, we find out it was too late,
right.
and the damage was done without any physical damage being done. And I think it's perfectly viable for him to act the way he does after that. Of course, I'd probably be a grumpy old hermit too if I had to you know beat up my little cousin or something, and then I'm like, you know what, I'm not going to beat you up. And then he's like, well, screw you, and then he kicks me in the shin and runs away. Like, at that point, the damage is done. My shin hurts. You know.
Yeah,
So.
No. I like one again, like you mentioned, the temptation of the dark side with that. Um, I also like the idea of like Luke had been a pacifist since Return of the Jedi, and then at the
Yeah.
face of immediate danger of the dark side, he resorts back to like violence, and then
Yeah.
immediately regrets it. Obviously,
Oh, that's such a good like
people
juxtaposition too.
people don't seem to understand that about his character. And then ultimately that tying all back together with him at the end. Not to jump ahead too much because I really want to talk about him and Ray.
Yeah.
But like him resorting back to being a pacifist and like sticking to his guns in order to help the resistance escape and in a sense defeat the First Order. But no, I wanted to touch on Ray and Luke. The one thing I don't like about Luke in the entire film is just the lightsaber over the shoulder thing. It's just not something that I like. I think that there were other thematic ways to do it. I understand the meaning behind it. I think that dropping the saber would have done the same effect. That throwing over the saber is one of my few gripes with The Last Jedi.
I don't mind it. I think it was meant to be a punch in the gut.
Oh yeah, but I think you still get that punch in the gut by dropping it.
Yeah. I don't know.
There's
Maybe.
something. There's some. I get it's comedic. Not
It's
that
comedic, but it's only comedic if you're open to the concept of things aren't the way you think they should be. So for
Yeah.
me, like, I thought it was kind of funny, but like, it's also like a dick move to hardcore fans. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
So that's why I like it, is because like, okay, I see what you did there, you asshole, and I'm okay with it.
Um, and while I do like a lot of Luke's arc in the movie, like you can't deny the fact that Luke very much in this movie feels kind of like Mark Hamill, which I'm not entirely a fan of. Um,
I can see that.
yeah, between like the shoulder brushing and I don't know, there's just like, and it doesn't help that Mark Hamill doesn't like the direction that Luke was taken. Not that
Yep.
it matters, but it shouldn't matter. Again, I like the direction of Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi.
I do too. It's a very modern take on an old character trope.
Right. No, I absolutely like it. I just there are certain aspects of it again, like throwing up the lightsaber, the Mark Hamill isms that go into the
Mhm.
performance. Those are aspects where I'm like, I don't know if that's Luke Skywalker, but like the core of what his arc is and who he is as a character in that movie is pure Luke Skywalker, and that's why the good outweighs the bad for me always with that.
Yeah.
Talking about Rey, kind of circling back to that,
Mhm.
the whole reason I brought up throwing of the lightsaber is like she shows up and she knows him as the legend of Luke Skywalker, and that's not who he is,
Yep.
and he defies her expectations, and it throws everybody for a loop. But I like the idea of like Luke is just a guy who like killed the Empire and the
Yeah.
Emperor and like helped defeat the Sith. And he's not like this legend figure, and that Rey kind of realizes that. And I like the idea that he cut himself off from the Force. I think that's a logical step for that character.
Yeah.
I don't like that people like blame Rian Johnson for that. Clearly JJ set that up. Some people disagree with me when I say that. Some people are like, "Oh, well,
No,
JJ just had him
I
on an
agree.
island," and I'm like, "No, JJ set him up to be alone."
Yeah.
And I think that it makes
I agree.
logical sense for Luke to want the Jedi Order to end. I think that Luke, to me, has always felt post Return of the Jedi like a gray Jedi in a sense. Someone who very clearly understands the balance between the two and the requirements that are needed, and that a balance is more healthy for the overall universe than one side outweighing the other. When the Jedi got too much power, it screwed everything up.
Yep.
And so I like that Rey is sort of this reality check for him, though, brings him back into it. But ultimately, he chooses, to be a pacifist over going back into battle.
Yeah.
Um,
I like that. I like that about him too. That his confrontation with Kylo in the First Order is not violent on his side, you know? And
yeah.
it's such a good fuck you too.
Oh yeah. I love the little hints to the fact that he's not real.
Yeah. I
Those are
remember in
great.
theaters just thinking like, there's something off about this.
Well, the haircut was a big throw off.
Yeah.
Um,
That and then yeah, I was like, there's something off about it. This is so awesome, and I'm like soaking it in right now. There's something off about it, and I didn't want to analyze it too much while watching it at the time.
yeah,
So
no, I had read some Last Jedi spoilers prior to the movie, unfortunately. But
oof.
the thing about it is, like, if you don't believe the spoilers when you're reading them, you're not gonna think they're spoilers. So
Yeah.
when I read them, and they said things like Snoke dies halfway through the movie, and Luke is force hologramming himself across the galaxy, I was like, this isn't real.
There's no way. That's bullshit. That's so
Um,
dumb.
so yeah, no. It worked. I like The Last Jedi. But like at
Yeah.
the time, I did not expect those things to happen anyway. I can't remember if I actually caught on to the fact that I was like, oh my god, those spoilers I read were true. I feel like I might have caught on, but regardless, I really like that entire sequence. It's really good. Um, as I said, like Luke, from that moment on, at the end of Return of the Jedi, turning to be a pacifist is so true to his character, and I like that. Outside of maybe Yoda, I mean Yoda gets pretty violent in the Clone Wars, but I don't know if it's out of necessity or out of like want. I think a lot of Jedi during I have a point to this, but I think a lot of Jedi during the Clone Wars like ended up wanting to be violent, um, versus like
Yeah.
needing to be. I don't know how Yoda falls into that, but for the sake of the argument, I'll say that he does fall into wanting to be violent. Um, so like, essentially, Luke, is the first Jedi that we see outside of since Qui-Gon that like resorts to being a pacifist, essentially, and Qui-Gon only fights when necessary.
Yeah.
And Luke resorts to full blown. I can't. Is it? Yeah, being a pacifist. I'm trying. What is it? Fascism? I don't know what it's called. Um,
Pacifism.
yeah, is that it? So
Yeah.
like he resorts to full blown pacifism, and force projects himself across the galaxy, um, which is a technique which is really cool. Really quick, I want to ask you, if Luke had not cut himself off from the Force, do you think that the Force projection would have killed him?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Is it confirmed that the force projection did kill him?
I mean, I would assume so.
That's kind of what I assume too.
I
I
think
mean,
that's what kills him.
honestly, I
You
think
can see there's some clear visible effort on his face and pain that comes from that.
yeah, I could see. Yeah, I mean that, and I think too that he felt that that was his time to, you know, go back into the force. I mean, I'm sure, I'm sure he didn't force project all that often in his youth.
No,
You know what I
I would
mean?
assume that's the first time he's ever done it.
Yeah, I would assume that that was a thing where it was like, I'm back in the force. I need to do this thing, and I'm going to make it happen, even though I don't know how.
Right.
And I think the payment for that is the physical toll it takes. But I think also at the end, he's kind of like, what I did is done. Now I can let myself go into the force. So I feel like it was a mix of him accepting um, that it was his time and the physical toll it took. I don't think he could have recovered from easily or even at all.
Right.
Um, but yeah.
Um. So that kind of wraps up the Last Jedi talk, I think. Anything else you wanted to add before? I want to talk a little bit about Episode 9. Um, but do you have any thoughts?
I'm
Anything
pretty
else?
much I'm good on my end.
Okay. So let's talk just a little bit about Luke and 9. We know he's gonna come back. There's no
Yep.
doubt. Um, to what extent we don't know. Pretty obvious he's gonna be a Force ghost. Um, how much he's in the movie remains to be seen. Because of the unfortunate passing of Carrie Fisher, I believe he'll be in there more than we think he might be right now. But to what lesson he serves is where I'm conflicted. Are you familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender?
Yes.
Okay, I've been bringing this up in the last couple episodes. Josh has seen it, Alex did not, so he did not know what I was talking about. I like the idea that Rey is sort of this Avatar Aang figure
Yep.
and is sort of this Force user out of time, um, and needing to call upon her past Force users or whatever, um, as not someone who's part of this famous lineage or whatever. She's kind of fallen out of the lineage of like Skywalkers because it's I'm gonna assume she's not a Skywalker. I don't think they're gonna retcon that. So for her to like now call it, Luke says it in the trailer. There, 1,000 generations of Jedi, and now we pass it on to you, or whatever the quote was. Um, Rey is channeling all of her like past lives in a way into this moment and to like defeat the Sith. And I like that there's that parallel between her and like Aang, I guess, and
I like that.
Avatar. Um,
Yeah, I like that. That's a good comparison, I think.
but how that circles back to Luke is I don't think Luke is going to be mentoring Rey as much as we think he is. Um,
Yeah.
I see Luke, or like my ideal situation for Luke in 9 is to be haunting Kylo Ren. It's something
I
he's
agree.
it's something he's done in Legends. Um, his Force Ghost haunted his grandson or great grandson, one or the other. Cade Skywalker in Legends.
Yep.
Um, the "See You Around, Kid" line. You strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you can imagine, kind of stuff. All those teasers at the end of their battle in The Last Jedi, all things that lead me to believe that Luke will be trying to either mess or turn Kylo to the light side in 9. Um, Now whether or not Kylo can turn off his reception to Force ghosts, I guess. Um, Force ghosts are super mysterious in canon. Um, we don't know if like you need to be open to receiving messages or interactions with Force ghosts in order to get them, or if it's something where Luke can kind of just like drop in on Kylo. I like the idea that Luke can kind of just drop in on Kylo, sort of being like a conscience on one shoulder and maybe the Emperor on another. For Kylo, I think that Rey is going to be super independent in this movie.
Yeah.
I like the idea that like she's getting training and help from like Obi-Wan and Yoda and Anakin and all these, and even Qui-Gon, like all of the Jedi are like helping her. I like that idea. I want them all to show up at some point. I prefer them to show up at the end, kind of like Return of the Jedi, where like all the Force ghosts show up. Um, Maybe even Kylo Ren if he dies. I don't really want him. I have a whole Kylo Ren theory, but that doesn't fit into this equation right now.
Right.
But I like the idea of Luke more so spending his time with Kylo in this movie than with Rey. So what are your overall thoughts on that?
No, I definitely like that idea too. Like, I don't want Luke to completely abandon Rey, but I want definitely the bulk of him, you know, being that that voice on Kylo's shoulder of like, oh, you don't have to do this type
Right.
thing. Um, and yeah, I love the idea of the other Jedi, showing themselves um to Rey. I mean, we see in Rebels that what's his name?
Kanan or Ezra?
Ezra. We see. I mean, Yoda speaks to Ezra. So it's not just like you don't have to be related or anything like that. It's just I'm sure that they'll all, yeah, at least one of them. I mean, we saw Yoda appear. I think Yoda, but I would love to see Obi-Wan appear to Rey or even Qui-Gon. But I think it'll mostly be Luke appearing to her. But I think he's definitely gonna spend most of his time fucking with Kylo.
Oh yeah. So other than that, I mean, we don't have a lot more to talk about with episode 9, I guess. But I do have a couple questions for you. I've been asking these to all my guests. What do you think the runtime will be for episode 9? And when do you think we get the next trailer?
I have no clue about runtime.
Come on, take a shot.
I think it's gonna be close to 3 hours. I'm calling like 2 hours and 48 minutes.
Oh, you're right in the middle.
Oh, really?
Everybody else. I'm at.
I think we'll get the
Yeah.
next trailer uh beginning of next month, beginning
Ooh,
of September.
you're earlier than I am. You're way earlier than I am.
Well, I don't know. When's the football season start?
Well, see, that's the thing, right? So, like,
Yeah,
the other trailers have been released in October
right.
for 7 and 8. Those were Monday Night Football games in October. But the problem is, I'm pretty sure we have gotten trailers in between those, between Celebration and the Monday Night Football one. I'm not sure though on that. I'd have to go back and check.
Well,
I don't think
we
we're
usually
getting
get
one.
don't
Go
we
ahead.
usually get a football and then like a TV spot?
When we usually get like a big football one and then like another TV spot in like November. And then you get a bunch of TV spots after that.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't think we're getting another trailer at all until October, like mid-October. Because what I think they're going to do is D23 is at the end of August. It's like August 25th. So I think what we're going to get is the attendees of D23 get exclusive episode 9 footage or trailer or whatever it may be. And then the public is going to get the Mandalorian trailer finally. And that is going to supposedly hold us off through September into October. And then we release the episode 9 trailer in early to mid-October. And I think because they're capitalizing on the fact that we're getting Star Wars Resistance Season 2, and we're also getting The Mandalorian, that they're going to be using that Star Wars content to hold fans over in the meantime. As for runtimes,
I'm amazed that. Wait, when does The Mandalorian come out? Is it next month or is it
No, that's mid-November.
November? Okay. I'm still amazed we haven't got a single trailer for it yet.
Well, you guys didn't.
Well, yeah, that's true. Which
I'm
amazed that hadn't leaked yet either.
Oh, it's out there.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, you can go watch that. Yeah, that's been out for a while.
Man.
I wouldn't do it though. I'd wait.
I'm gonna wait for the official, and I've been busy.
Yeah, no, that'll come soon. I mean, I don't see them releasing it prior to D23.
Right.
Which
yeah,
is D23 is in like 3 weeks. So we'll get some Mandalorian content soon. Maybe they're just gonna release a ton of it. That'd be kind of nice.
I don't know.
Or they're gonna keep it close to the chest. I don't know. We'll find out. As for runtime, you are currently you are the highest currently, but you are right in the middle. I am at 2 hours and 42 minutes. Josh is at 2 hours and 32 minutes. Alex is 2 hours and 47 minutes, and you are at 2 hours and 48 minutes. So we're all in the similar ballpark for the most part. None of us think it's going to be under 2.5 hours, which it definitely won't be. Josh really lowballed it, but we'll see. I'm looking forward to seeing what those numbers are going to ultimately end up being. Do you have any final thoughts before we kind of wrap everything up here, Nate?
No, not really, man. I'm tired now, though.
Yeah, I know. I do these 2.5 hour ones twice a week, and I get real tired by the end of them. I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
I gotta try to spread out some of these recording times, but I like doing them semi-weekly. I like having 2 episodes a week. It pumps out some good, solid content. So that'll do it for the 3rd episode of Sean Talks Star Wars, airing on August 9th, 2019. Thank you, Nate, for coming and joining us for this episode. Very happy to have you aboard. You're definitely going to be a recurring guest. Everybody I've had on so far is definitely going to be coming on frequently. Nate's got his own projects in the work, of course, which I'm looking forward to promoting sometime within the next couple months whenever those are ready. Nate, it's been linked under your head this whole time. You don't know that it's there, but where can people find you online?
Twitter. Twitter for now. I won't be super active here probably the next 5 months with school, but come January, I will have projects in the works. School will be done. Um, things will be happening. I'll be active again, other than the occasional on here or wherever. So
But yes, follow Nate at Drunken
yeah,
Dragon with some threes and some zeros in there.
something like that. I can never keep track of it.
It's okay. And you can follow me, as always, my personal account at Real Sean Hussey on Twitter. You can also follow the page at Sean Talks SW on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, a reminder, we have daily posts about Star Wars. I post like 4 or 5 things a day, including the chronological Clone Wars rewatch. I'm really looking forward to doing that every day. So if you guys are interested in the Clone Wars, if you're interested in my thoughts on the Clone Wars, probably sometime I might hold off on the Clone Wars episode until after we wrap up the entire chronological rewatch. So that will be sometime late November, early December, right before Clone Wars Season 7 comes back. So maybe we'll do an episode on Clone Wars then. I'm not going to guarantee guests for next week yet. We're still working out some scheduling things on that. But we should be seeing my buddy Frank come on. Him and I were supposed to talk on Monday, but things come up per usual. Stuff happens. But Frank should be on sometime next week to talk all things Lego Star Wars. I'm looking forward to that. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. Really appreciate it. Any last thoughts, Nate, before we send them off?
It's nap time.
It is nap time. And as always, once again, thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, please give it a like button, subscribe. We have, as I said, 2 episodes of the podcast coming out per week. It's a lot to digest. It's on Tuesdays and Fridays, but long car rides, stuff like that. If you want to break it up into chunks, I appreciate you guys. Thank you. The views and the subscribers have been great so far. So thank you so much for that. And as always, may the Force be with you. Peace.